Uh, I'm feeling a lot of honor and privilege to present my paper here in this big seminar, in this big webinar rather now in Kuala Lumpur. Uh, I would say greetings to senior professors, to experts from industry, to students, and to all those who are listening to me. So I'm going to talk about a very interesting topic of liquefaction potential of reservoir delta or reservoir sediment deposits. It pertains to case of a major dam in Pakistan, which is called Mangla Dam. You see, whenever a dam is there is halting of water, there is stoppage of water, and whenever there is stoppage of water, the river water carrying sediments are shedded, are loaded into the reservoir. So that forms the reservoir delta. There are natural deltas too, and in natural cases, two water bodies, when they connect together, like a river connecting another river, or a lake or ocean, there is a stagnant condition which is introduced, which results into deposition or shedding of sediments. So similarly, in case of a river meeting a lake, here you see in the picture, uh, here river meeting a lake, and here delta which is forming, and it grows progressively as more material comes in. And here you see in this picture, you see a host of waterways, you see connecting one to the other, and at their intersections there are small deltas. Here you see a formation of big delta. Now, what is meant by the term liquefaction? When soil starts behaving like a liquid, a very simple layman-like definition, but I'll explain the you see further detailed element. It when soil is like a fluid or a liquid, this means that it has lost its shearing strength, and so we know that water body or molasses has no shearing strength. So when a structure is sitting or even under its own weight, when there is no strength, it will tend to flow. So in general terms, when we have a saturated or a partially saturated soil with high moisture content, losing its strength and stiffness after being shaken by forces like earthquake, so it will tend to behave like a liquid. The first use of liquefaction term was used back in 1918 by Alan Hazen, a geotechnical engineer, a soil mechanics expert at that time, in relation to the Calaveras Dam in California. So he thought that it is something like liquefaction. It was being understood for the first time at that time. We can understand the term liquefaction in terms of shear strength of soil, because the shear strength of soil is, in terms of stress, is composed of, you see, effective stress, which is equal to the total stress minus pore water pressure. During the liquefaction process, the pore water pressure goes on increasing, goes on going up, 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 and the effective strength as a result keeps going down, down, down. There could be a stage when the pore water pressure is equal to the total stress sigma. At that stage, uh, the effective strength is zero, effective stress is zero, and that is the point where we have 100% pore water pressure and zero effective stress. So in like a good definition, all phenomenon which give rise to reduction in shearing resistance and stiffness and cause an increase in the pore water pressure, whether the load is cyclic loading or static loading called monotonic loading. And there's a term initial liquefaction in such deposits, which means that for a very short interval of time, that is momentarily, there is zero condition of effective stress, total loss in the strength. Now, what is the mechanism? Let's talk about the mechanism of liquefaction. When a soil is dry, you see, and it is vibrated, the particles tend to come closer in a denser rearrangement. But when it is saturated, it's not so simple. The water present within the soil will resist coming them closer. So what happens is that some particles are in touch, others are not in touch. So this is the point when there is a pressure on the water and the whole body behaves like a liquid. Here is in this picture you can see in the form of a picture you can see that to the left we have particles of soil in certain arrangement. They are connected together, and where are their connections? Stress is transferred under earthquake loading. This you see this is before earthquake loading. Under earthquake loading, when the soil is shaken, and it is shaken quickly, so that there is one pulse of water, and before the second pulse goes, you see, the entire water is not moved out, so it starts developing pressure, and there is physical separation you can see between certain particles. At certain point there are physical separations, so there is a reduction in the contact stresses on the whole. And with longer earthquake, with more loading unloading cycles, there is a total separation, hence it behaves like a liquid. The contact forces have reduced basically. Though generally liquefaction is used for non-cohesive soil, but cohesive soils in the new literature have also been classified as liquefiable when they demonstrate excessive loss in strength and high deformation, like the liquefiable soils do. And this is particularly true when their plasticity index is less than 15. Here you see three different kinds of loadings. I just want to demonstrate the earthquake loading. There are numerous loading unloading cycles in a very short duration in a few seconds. And here you see the laboratory simulation of that, of cyclic loading. It could be any other pattern, but generally a symmetrical pattern, loading, unloading, loading, unloading. And here this is a monotonic or uh, static loading. You see, the monotonic loading could be slowly applied or quickly applied. When it's quickly applied, even the sand, even sandy gravel, they are not able to drain water and develop over pressure. So the phenomenon of liquefaction has been well understood and applied generally to sands and gravels. And in 1964, the theory of liquefaction started developing after you see earthquakes in Japan, in Nagata, and in California. Three types of liquefactions with regard to different deposits. One is the flow liquefaction, second is the cyclic mobility, and the third is the cyclic liquefaction. Now, what a flow liquefaction is. Flow liquefaction is the one in which the static stresses of the soil they exceed the strength. Hence, it has to flow because the applied forces or applied stresses exceed the strength, and it happens normally when the slopes at which these deposits are present are more than 5%. So we call them rather sharp slopes from the flow liquefaction point of view. So there could be several hundred meters of movement, and the famous failures of this type of flow liquefaction have been Sheffield Dam and Lower San Fernando dam cell. The second type is the cyclic mobility, in which the applied force or the applied shear stress is less than the strength. So this is a strange case in which the applied force is less than the strength, yet the deformations are excessive. Why? Because of the repeated application of loading cycles. Enough deformation takes place. There is some buildup of pore pressures too, although it is not 100%. So effective strength is not reduced to zero, it is above zero. So this takes place at gentler slopes which are generally less than 3%. So here you see in liquefaction one common phenomenon which is observed at places is that when there is an underlying soil of liquefiable soil like sandy soil and above are located in a non-cohesive or impermeable soil, somehow because of the pressure rupture uh, surface forms here with the result that there is a springing out of sand, you see, with water called sand boil, and sand will accumulate here as a heap. This is a very famous phenomenon where liquefaction takes place. Third type is the cyclic liquefaction, in which under the cyclic loading, which are loading, unloading, reversal is there, loading, unloading, 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 a condition of zero effective strength, as I showed you in one of the previous slides, uh, condition of the zero effective stress results. So this is when the soil behaves like a liquid. So this can occur in many saturated non-cohesive soils, and it's a very serious condition of liquefaction. Now, what's the factor of safety in liquefaction? Liquefaction phenomenon is controlled by a term called factor of safety. Generally, in civil engineering, for any purpose, the factor of safety would be the strength over the applied stress, the strength over the stress in general terms. In soils, the shear resistance divided by the earthquake-induced shear stress. And in terms of liquefaction business, the liquefaction is said to be controlled by cyclic stress ratio, the ratio of the shear stress divided by the effective vertical stress. So that is the cyclic stress. Its ratio is the cyclic stress ratio. So the ratio of the cyclic stress ratio required to cause liquefaction and the cyclic stress ratio induced by earthquake. So in the form of symbols, it is CRR, soil cyclic resistance ratio, CRR of soil divided by the cyclic stress ratio induced by earthquake. So it is just balance of two forces. In terms of their mathematical forms, the cyclic stress ratio induced by earthquake, CSR by earthquake, simply the average shear stress over the effective vertical overburden stress. And average means 65%. On the basis of statistical average, 65% of this A max over G and the ratio of the total to vertical stresses and stress reduction factor. So this is the cyclic stress ratio which goes into the denominator of that factor of safety equation shown in the previous slide. The numerator in the equation comes from this graph you see. We calculate cyclic stress ratio corresponding to the in situ strength. And one common parameter for finding in situ strength is the SPT blows. So we know the SPT blows and the corrected SPT blow, and depending on the percentage of fines present, we can read out the cyclic stress ratio, which is the resistance ratio. So here you see, we got the definition of the numerator and denominator to find the factor of safety. If it is less than 1, of course, the soil is liquefiable. And this big criteria has been used in the evaluation of the liquefaction potential of the delta deposit. Now, after the initial definition, let's go to the actual dam, Mangla Dam. Located, you see, it is accessible from the capital Islamabad, 122 kilometers, and a long distance from sea from Karachi. It's also accessible, you see, by national highway, more than 1400 kilometers. So here you see view of the big main reservoir dam, and this is here where we are talking about the formation of delta deposits. Just a view, uh, a big view of the operation of the tunnels. You see irrigation tunnels. You see power tunnels of Mangla Dam. It's a very big view, a lot of force of water. Mangla Dam is sited in an seismically active area. This slide is just to give you a feel that we have located main dam here, and you see we have a system of very well defined known faults having different potential of seismicity, and as a result you can see the historic, you see, and the instrumental data of the epicenters of the earthquake, you see, near the near the dam site. So for this purpose, uh, its seismicity was evaluated, and the PGA for OBE condition was 0.14 G, and for maximum credible earthquake condition it was 0.40 G. So the dam was completed in 1967, and after many years in 2012, its raising was decided that it should be raised by 40 feet from 1234 to 1274. There is a 40 feet raise to allow storage of more water. So here you see it was completed in 1967, and you see there are the other attributes. It's a multi-purpose hydropower project over River Jhelum. Now, history of sediments, which has resulted in the formation of delta, which is growing. You see, basically, a lot of sediment load is coming from the hills from the catchment area, which are having very little vegetation, so more erosion there. So it results into high sediment rate, particularly during the monsoon season, which in Pakistan is from July to September in the 3 months. And there are three and in fact four main branches of water which conveys the sediment load. And here you see about 20% of gross capacity was lost in 2005. Hence, the decision was taken to raise it, and in 2012, raising was complete, and settlement issues are still being resolved, the resettlement issues. And sediment deposition rate generally is 34,000 acre feet per year, 72,000 million tons per year. So sediment has been studied to move at a rate of 0.38 miles per year towards the power tunnel, towards the main dam, towards the power tunnel. The pivot point, the top point where the slope change from flat to a slope, you see, that is about 5 miles, something like close to 8 kilometers. And here you see the sedimentation history and the projection on the basis of the computer simulation that so many billion cubic meters of sediments will be deposited, you see, in different years. Within this duration, 2007 to 2021, with the raise, as the dam is raised now, 0.038 billion cubic meter per year. And in this duration, it will be reduced and further reduced up to 2087 because of some better steps to be taken in the catchment area called watershed management by making check dams, small dams to control erosion, and by increasing vegetation. Here you see is a profile. I'm sorry it's not that clear, but still you can find out that this is the profile of year 2005 of the sedimentation of the reservoir deposits. And this is the initial, original bed of river Jhelum at the location where dam will be. This is the location of the dam, distance 0. So, in delta terminology, this top point where slope starts, that sloping part is called foreset. This top point is called pivot point, and this is called topset, foreset, and this part after another change of slope is called bottom set. So, three parts of delta: bottom set, foreset, and top set. And this point on the top is called the pivot point. So it is generally the pivot point which is taken to control the movement of delta. What is the potential threat? Of course, as other deltas, this delta was also found increasing in size, and it was feared that a big earthquake could cause either flow liquefaction or total liquefaction, cyclic liquefaction, which would move huge sediment load into the power tunnel, which will damage instantly all the turbines and the power machinery. So it was thought that some measures have to be taken to check its movement, to control its movement. So for that purpose, first of all, detailed field and laboratory geotechnical investigation were planned. It was a challenging task because the lake depth, water depth in the lake is several hundred feet. So special barges were selected to drill deep boreholes up to 135 feet, 12 boreholes of 6 inches diameter, and 262 feet water head. SPTs were carried out in this, and vein shear tests using GeoNor were done, and undisturbed samples were collected carefully with Osterberg stationary piston sampler. And in this figure, you see the dam is here. This is the location of the dam, and you see these points where borings were done. You see in the reservoir delta at different places in the reservoir bed, and you can see consequently the types of soils. Uh, these are basically sands and silts and some containing some little clay particles. But you see, look at the level difference. The highest levels indicate to the uh, highest point in the delta. and the lowest point indicates the lowest point, you see, or the riverbed itself. And here you see the depth of drilling you see for different boreholes, on-site, offshore site investigation. OS is the symbol for that. And here you can see that those containing the depth. Here the depth is of drilling in the sediment is 135 on the foreset on the slope, and you see close to the pivot point 100 about 100 feet, 108 and 96 feet. So it's a thick delta. And if you look at the standard penetration test blows, which is an index of the strength of any soil deposit, you see 0, 5, 10, 15. A good number of data, more than 50% values, about two-thirds of the values are less than 5. So this indicates, and it continues with depth. This indicates very weak nature of the delta deposit right to the deepest point, more than 100 feet. And here you see different views of the bad you see on which the drilling was done in Bangla Lake. And after carrying out this offshore drilling, the samples were recovered carefully and they were taken to the laboratory after properly packing them to carry out many static and dynamic tests. Starting from the index properties test, grain size, atomic limits, NLC, dry density, maximum and minimum density, specific gravity, the odometer test to find the settlement potential, the CU triaxial compression with pore water pressure measurement, and the cyclic triaxial liquefaction test. In addition, the resonant column test also to see the dynamic behavior of the deposits under the earthquake loading. And here you see uh, the distribution of fines, the percentage of fines you see. As you can see, they are variable. You see from low value to high value, and you see they are variable. You see with depth. So we have sands and silts. You see with some little clay content too. And here you see in another density. Yeah, they are the in situ submerged densities. Yeah, you can see their values. You see they are on the lower order. The distribution of the void ratio. The void ratio you see varies from a value of 0.6 to 1. You see, and that goes with depth. The depth doesn't improve the void ratio. Rather, void ratio does increase at depth. You see, because of the soil type. So the whole delta deposit, in fact, was found to be fairly weak, fairly fragile. So two approaches were made to find out the liquefaction potential of this reservoir delta deposit. One was a qualitative set of methods, and the other was a quantitative set of methods to result into actual numbers. In the qualitative study, a steady state line concept as given by Castro was used, then evaluation of relative density, and to draw some conclusions about liquefaction behavior from the pore water pressure and from the vein shear test approach. So first of all, Castro's steady state lines. In this figure you see two lines. You see this void ratio versus log of pressure curve. So any relationship between void ratio and log of pressure following a line which shows you see such a trend that there is no increase in volume or decrease in volume, no change in volume and no change in pressure at failure. So this corresponds to the minimum void ratio, the densest condition, and this steady state line corresponds to the condition which is the uh, maximum, you see, void ratio. So here you can see this area between the two lines indicates those points of soil of Mangla Reservoir which may not get liquefied. And here, a positive liquefaction here, but I am sure that most of these are also liquefiable. Below the second line, the lower line, the soils are not going to get liquefied, but there is a positive indication of the liquefaction. Now, second qualitative evaluation is the relative density. You see, your cell that quite a big number of data shows very low relative densities. You see, so that indicates that the liquefaction potential is there. And if we look at the standard chart for different peak ground acceleration values, these are the minimum relative densities required to avoid liquefaction. Our data values, our accelerations of maximum credible earthquake will be touching zero point 0.4 g. So we ought to have very high relative densities, which we didn't have. So that gave a positive qualitative indication of the liquefaction potential of those deposits. And here you see the results of the uh, consolidated untrained triaxial compression test with pore water pressure measurements. So it is the pore water pressure during the test which tells whether the soil is dilatant or whether it is contractive. If the soil is dense, then it will show dilatancy or negative pore water pressure. If the soil is loose during a triaxial test, and positive pore water pressure, and here you can see maximum data is showing positive pore water pressure, the positive indication of the presence of the large liquefaction potential of the delta deposit. So, this way qualitatively it was confirmed that liquefaction potential was there. Now, we went into quantitative evaluation. One was following seed and harder approach, and the other was the cyclic triaxial liquefaction test approach. I'll be discussing this one in a more detail, that how did we arrive at the liquefaction. You see, for every boron data, what we did was, out of this table, basically we are using SPT data to find out the resistance of the soil, cyclic stress resistance ratio, and cyclic stress ratio induced by earthquake for a magnitude of earthquake magnitude of 7.5. And here, the ratio of the two, you see, is given here as the factor of safety. This is the factor of safety. Here you can see quite low factor of safety are there, quite low. What to talk of one? They are just a small fraction. So that very well indicates that the whole deposit is liquefiable all the way down, and this is further indicated in the plot that very low values you see they are there. So this was indicated in all the boreholes. You can see low values of factor of safety. Yeah. So another attempt was made to find that if sliding takes place, how much material will be able to move to the power tunnel. So sliding analysis was made along surfaces which yielded a failure factor of safety, which is 1, factor of safety of 1. So it was found that this failure surface would yield something like 0.113 million acre feet of delta
Uh,
deposit. After liquefaction, you see the in the previous slides which have just been passed, the after liquefaction, post liquefaction strength was given. Now, after it was confirmed by qualitative and quantitative method that liquefaction is going to be there, we have to save dam and the power system. So four options were considered to mitigate this risk. One was to dredge out the sediments, but it was ruled out. This would be expensive, very expensive and time consuming. Second was reduction of erosion potential, elaborate control of check dams and vegetation. Yes, for future it is good, but what to do with the current delta? Flushing of sediment through tunnels, it could be less practical. And construction of subaqueous dikes. Yes, this was a simpler solution and it was adopted. And here you see that on the upstream side, this is the reservoir, blue water, and this is the dike you see, which has been constructed, you see, to stop the flow of the delta towards, you see, the dam and towards the power tunnel. So the broad conclusions and recommendations are that sediments do take place in large and medium dams of a big magnitude. They make delta, which keeps on slowly moving. So offshore investigations tell us that what is the material and whether they have the liquefaction potential or not. And this is how it has been shown here. So delta sediments pose a big risk. They're very weak, down to the depth of hundreds of feet if they're in hundreds of feet under the seismic loading. So this means that wherever deltas are there, big dams are there, the deltas would be there in the reservoir, so some mitigative actions have to be planned.